to SIM Online Masterclass Series Season 2. And this is our third session, and the topic for today focuses on Lean. Just a few house rules before I introduce the speaker for today. If you do have any questions along the way, please feel free to type your question out in the Q&A segment on the right-hand side of your browser. There is a function, there is an option called Ask Your Questions here. So if you have any question, you can type it over there. And Dr. Neil Davis and our Warwick staff will assist to answer your questions. And if you have other questions regarding to other programs under SIM, you can also chat with our staff at the General Inquiry e-booth. You just go back, exit the browser, and then there's a General Inquiry function booth over there. So let me just introduce the speaker for today. And Neil Davis is a Principal Teaching Fellow in WMG, University of Warwick. He has worked as an engineer and project manager in aerospace, automotive, and automation companies before joining WMG in 1989. His current research interests include applications for discrete event simulation, lean operations, and Factory 4.0. He brought along many years of research and industry experience in the aspect of lean principles and applications. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Neil Davis. Dr. Neil Davis, hand over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep, looks good.
Great. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I'm an associate professor in WMG at the University of Warwick, and I'd like to make the case for why this thing called Lean is far more than just Kanban. So I assume that everyone has heard of Lean, but despite it having been widely known about for 30 years or so now, it still exercises management thinking. It can still be frustratingly difficult to get it to work in the way that firms like Toyota do. Many firms claim to practice this thing called Lean, but few firms do it very well. I often find that initial efforts show great promise, but shortly afterwards find that the effort has run out of steam. Why is this? What is it about Lean that people don't get? What should they be doing to do it better? And whose responsibility is it to make this happen? So you already know, don't you, that Lean is about Kanban, isn't it? Just in time, JIT. But what about other techniques that firms use, like MRP and ERP? Their proponents can reasonably claim that it's what they're aiming to do as well. That MRP is in fact a way of getting just in time. They're not wrong. So what is special about the way that Lean accomplishes just in time compared with these other techniques? Lean is about the elimination of waste. That's something you'll hear people saying all the time. And they'll often associate this with the term muda, Japanese word muda. And for many practitioners, this is all that they think of. But how do we define this term waste? What does it mean? Well, the critical observation is that waste can only be defined once we understand value, and specifically customer value. Value as our customers see it, not as we, the provider, sees it. So a common mistake that people make is to tackle waste as seen from inside the firm, rather than seeing it from the customer's viewpoint, from outside, if you like. And we end up chasing the wrong goals, eliminating the wrong things. Now, when we talk about waste, we're not talking about spillage. We're not talking about airborne pollution. We're not talking about these environmental wastes, important though they are, of course. They're not the wastes that Lean theory is concerned with. Now, some of you may have heard the term the 7 wastes. I hope so. But if not, just think of them as a way of classifying waste to make it easier to identify and to find solutions to. And yes, the observant of you will see that there are actually 8 here, because since the 7 wastes were first sort of classified many years ago, people have gradually come to agree that there is an eighth waste, the +1 shown on this figure, which is unused talent or human creativity. So what are the 7 wastes? I'm not going to teach them here. I'll just quickly go through them. Conveyance is transport, moving things around more than we need to. Defects is quality. Overprocessing is doing more with our product or our service than the customer actually values and really wants to pay for. One of the big wastes is waiting, people waiting to do things, waiting for material to arrive, shipments to be delivered, that kind of thing. Motion is stretching and reaching and lifting when we don't need to, where better organization of our workplace could avoid that. One of the big wastes is overproduction. So many manufacturing firms produce in batches, and the size of batches is determined by something like economic order quantity or economic batch quantity. And the thing to recognize here is that this is actually driven by something called setup time. And if you have long setups, you have big batches, and those batches often don't match with what customers are ordering, so you end up overproducing. You spend more time producing goods that actually you're not going to sell immediately. And this leads to the 7th waste here, which is inventory. And now at the moment, of course, with interest rates pretty low, the cost of inventory isn't as high as it might be. But when interest rates rise, then inventory costs become very high and sometimes crippling. And then the last waste, as I've said, which is unused talent. So we aren't Toyota and we don't make motor cars. This is a now infamous quote from someone in a British hospital when they were first being introduced to lean. There's an element of rejection of foreign ideas here, of all these Japanese words. It illustrates the importance of understanding the thinking behind techniques and not fixating on the headlines or the fact that some of the words are in Japanese. And I found this example on the web a few weeks ago, which is a veterinary practice. Now, clearly they aren't Toyota and they don't make motor cars, but they have modified these 8 wastes. They're still the 8 wastes, you can still see the names there, but they've implemented their own little graphical icons on there, which shows that they're thinking about what these principles mean for their particular organization, and that's the critical point. So I'm going to start off looking at something I call Little Lean, which is tools and techniques. And what we've got here, if you don't recognize it, is a picture of St. George and the Dragon. So I'll come on to explain why that's there in a short while. So the reality is that many firms are over-eager for some kind of heroic figure, whether that's a person or a technique, a theory, that will slay the dragon of uncompetitivity. I don't think I said that right, but you get the idea. As a result, they see lean only as a set of short-term expedients. And too many firms that say they are lean aren't truly lean. They've adopted some tools and techniques, but not changed the way that they think about problems, and that's the critical thing. So they can hurt the dragon, chase it away for a short while, but they don't keep it away for good. It keeps coming back. So this dragon, okay, the dragon is low productivity, poor quality, high cost, missed deliveries. Now, for world-class success, I would argue that lean should be understood as strategic and not simply tactical. Whereas the tools and techniques provide individual tactical capabilities, it's only when they're put together as part of a whole that they achieve their full power. So I'll have a little look at the tools and techniques. Clearly, there are lots of them, and this isn't I'm not seeking to teach you these tools and techniques. Some of them you might recognize the terms. So a guy called Jim Womack, you may have heard of, who's probably the person most influential in bringing lean concepts to the West, once said that lean tools and techniques are necessary, but they're not sufficient. On their own, the tools can make a poorly performing organization better, but they won't make them world-class, and improvements will only be temporary. So all of the techniques on this list provide solutions to individual issues. These might match to some of the classified wastes. Knowing which ones to use and in combination with the others is the real test of someone's lean understanding, either an individual or an entire organization. So we've got a term that I think most people will have heard of called Kanban. Heijunka, which probably people haven't. That's in English, we call that production leveling or production balancing. I'll talk later briefly about visual management. There's standard work. I mean, a lot of people perhaps don't realize that Lean originates within the Toyota production system, and more importantly, that the Toyota production system originates in the Ford system. And of course, the Ford system, if you've studied engineering, particularly manufacturing, is based on the work of Taylor and Taylorist thinking, scientific management, work study, time and motion study, things like that. So in fact, certainly in manufacturing, but also in service organizations, and I'll give a case study at the end, we see the concept of standard work, and that means discipline. Jidoka, poka-yoke, and other terms that you might have come across. Shujinka, pretty important one here. It's the idea of using flexible assets in a flexible way. And the most flexible asset that most organizations have are their people. And the last one here, man-machine separation, is the idea of avoiding having the waste of waiting by having a machine operator standing watching a machine while it operates. In Lean, what we would say is that if we've got an effective machine, a process, we might need an operator to initiate that, but then they can walk away and do some other tasks and only come back to the machine when it's finished. In this way, one person can operate multiple pieces of equipment. So the trouble with dragon slayers, consultants, if you like, is that, that although they're heroic figures, they're not necessarily universally good. St. George, had his faults, like all heroes do. In fact, I sometimes refer to this concept as being like a samurai. They come in and they impose their will. In fact, a truly lean person is more like a farmer. So the trouble with heroes, with consultants, if you rely on those too much, is they're hard to find, to get the right ones. They're expensive, and they keep going off to fight someone else's dragon. Wouldn't it really be better if we could train our own dragon slayers? So I talked earlier about little lean, but really the world-class lean that I would want you to think about is what I call big lean. It's only when the tools and techniques are integrated in a system-wide strategy that the full power of lean can be realized. So like most good strategies, a successful lean strategy must harness every asset of the organization and its partners to a common purpose. So this means technical resources, material, information, and of course, the human element. So what most people don't realize is that Toyota, as well as their production system, also have a complementary management system. And operated together on a company-wide basis, these provide a more effective environment to develop and sustain lean. And it's taken Toyota 70 years, and they're still working on it. Lean within Toyota is evolving. Every year they'll make adaptations. It is, as I said earlier, an adaptation of the Ford system, originating back in around the 1950s was when they really started to crack on with this. So one of the key concepts that shifts us from just the application of individual tools and techniques to a more fundamental way of looking at the way we operate our businesses is to move from our classical left to right thinking to what in Lean is referred to as right to left thinking. So most of us, we develop our ideas from left to right. We start at the beginning on the left and progress to the right. It's how we learn to read, how we write, how we do calculations, draw diagrams, develop computer codes. It can seem logical, but it's wrong. We end up doing what suits us and not what the customer needs. And this introduces waste, the very thing that we're trying to eliminate. So Lean says instead that we should always start with the customer and then work backwards. And in this way, we avoid accidentally including activities that we think are necessary, but aren't actually necessary from the customer's perspective. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't things that we might do that the customer doesn't realize are important, but it requires us to think very carefully before we adopt those. And by working right to left, we can do that better. So what we would seek to do is to actually work from the final step, which is what the customer needs, which is the value, and say, okay, well, if that's the value that we give to the customer when we, let's say, ship a product, then what is the step before that? What is the minimum step before that, what we need to do to get to the final step? And then we keep asking that question and work our way backwards until we come to the start of our business process. Now, obviously, the process that we then explain to our people will be left to right because everyone thinks that way. But it will have been developed with thinking from right to left. I often find that with my undergraduate students who study Lean, they will apply Lean techniques to the thing they understand. And it may not be the thing that the customer really has as a problem. So what this means is that we end up barking up the wrong tree. If you don't put the customer need first, then you can end up chasing the wrong savings, making improvements in places that your customer will not get benefits from, wasting valuable time and effort. So I'm not finishing yet, but I've got a sort of semi-finished slide here, which is finishing looking at tools and techniques. I'm going to look at one technique that's quite common in industry and has been for a number of years. It's called value stream mapping. And it helps firms analyze the current way things are done. From this, identifying and classifying the waste, and then using this as evidence that we can then propose future concepts around in a way that shows evidence-based thinking, scientific thinking. If you look in the theory about Lean, you'll see that companies like Toyota are always saying they want to speak with data. They want to use a scientific approach, an evidence-based approach. So here, for example, you can see Kanban. This is this symbol here. The thing looks like a little document with a closed over upper right-hand edge. There are two of them here. And Kanban is a way of obtaining a just-in-time delivery of material using a pull-based mechanism. Now, if you've studied value stream mapping, some of you will realize that some of the data in this diagram is actually wrong. But don't worry about that. I'm not teaching you value stream mapping here. So, how many firms make as much use of their human capital as they should? And if they're not making use of their human capital, why not? People are our most valuable asset. This is a management mantra that has been going the rounds for over 20 years. I first heard it from the chairman of a car maker in the UK in 1997. And it's true, or it should be. Now, global education is producing increasingly capable thinkers in ever-increasing numbers at all levels. More and more graduates are finding themselves in roles that don't make use of their skills and their expectations. And this is the eighth waste of creativity, human creativity. The answers are already there in your organizations. People already know most of the answers. The question is, are you asking the right people? So really, if we're moving towards what most people would aspire to, which is something called lean thinking, we're seeking to develop our managers in a slightly different way. And this challenges the culture of organizations. We need to change the way that we manage and the way that we evaluate managers themselves. So the role of management needs to evolve. Managers need to be more prepared to let go. They need to give their people the opportunity to fail. Because it's only through this that we truly learn what's the way that something really works. So people need to be given the chance to release this latent creativity. And this is really what I'm talking about when I say we need a whole army of our dragon slayers. Instead of a single St. George coming in from the outside, firms of the future will need to have whole armies of problem solvers inside the organization. As I said, the good news is that they're already there. Firms just haven't realized it yet. They are your people. Now, few amongst you, as I said, will not have learned through making mistakes. So therefore, why should you expect something different from your workers? In order to get them to have a go, because it's quite daunting to actually volunteer ideas and potentially risk appearing a little foolish perhaps, there must be a no blame culture. because of course, once you blame people and you chastise them for a mistake, they won't contribute any further at that point. They become embarrassed. So we want the managers to become more like coaches. Their role is to guide and inspire rather than dictate and cajole. Now, management is a waste. Let me say that again, seriously. Management is a waste. It does not add value for the customer. And let's be honest, a lot of management is exceedingly tedious. Dealing with problems that keep recurring, endless meetings, listening to people discussing things that don't affect you, a lot of waiting around, traveling when very little of any value gets done. Now, whilst discipline is still important in a lean firm, management should be thinking about redefining itself, freeing the managers up and letting them become what people call leaders of change. So let's have a reality check. I'm not saying here that workers should be free to do what they please. Lean techniques still require discipline and focus. But nevertheless, most changes are still initiated by management and led by technical teams. However, whenever possible, we should be seeking to empower the workers and give them opportunities, supporting them and guiding them to help them understand concepts, to help them develop techniques. Of course, we send them on training courses, but training courses are useless unless people get the opportunity to practice the new skills in the workplace. Now, I like the final statement here. If the learner hasn't learned, the teacher hasn't taught. Okay, it neatly defends the right of the worker or the junior manager to make mistakes when they try something new. Such mistakes, however, reflect a failure of their supervisors to explain things better. And this is again why I say it's the role of the manager is now really as a coach. And if the coach hasn't coached well, that's the coach's fault, not the person receiving the coaching. So lean is not a project. If you ever hear people saying, I'm doing a lean project, you've got to be suspicious, okay? Because lean is a journey that never ends. It really is relentless. There is never good enough. That can also be quite daunting. You know, people say, well, when is this thing going to finish? Well, the answer is it's not going to finish. The ultimate aim, and some of you may have heard this statement, is perfection. So the goal is to develop and utilize the skills, thinking, and creativity of everyone in the organization. In fact, everyone through what's called the value system. So that's your organization, your supplier organizations, your distributors, all of the business partners, because the customer pays for everything, not just the work you do, but everything in the supply chain. And the ultimate aim is to create something that's called a learning organization, which is an organization that learns and adapts for itself from within, rather than requiring dragon slayers to come from outside occasionally and tell people what to do, because that doesn't lead to learning. It just leads to copying, and not very good copying at that. So lean expertise cannot be taught. Actually, you can't go on a training course to become lean. It has to be learned in the workplace. You can go on courses like, for example, the modules we run in lean, and that will give you an understanding of concepts and principles, but ultimately your ability to be a lean person, it only comes through your practice. So today's managers, in order to be effective, need to mentor the future generation. They need to give the junior managers, the supervisors, challenges and help them discover solutions. And this book, Toyota Kata by Mike Ruther, is a really good book. Not something to read at the beginning of your lean journey. It's something that once you've understood tools and techniques will make a lot more sense. So kata are routines. If you've done jiu-jitsu, other forms of martial arts, you'll recognize the term. It's the postures that you learn, routines that you learn. So there are two types. There's the improvement kata between the supervisor and the work team. Okay, and then there's the coaching kata between the manager and the junior manager, or between the junior manager and the supervisor. Now, the first of these, the improvement kata, is associated with a term that you might have been expecting me to use earlier, and I haven't, called Kaizen, continuous improvement. The supervisor helps the team develop better ways of doing their local work. The coach, the mentor, helps the learner, the supervisor, This is the management coaching. Better understand how they can motivate people, how they can convert strategic plans into operational plans. And it's a way that in lean firms, they spot future talent. They spot the junior managers who've got what it takes to be the leaders of the future. There is still a consultant role to get the process going and to facilitate later, to critique. So I'm going to finish off with a case study. This is an insurance company, an international insurance company. They do claims processing, they arrange service, they sell policies and do billing. They have about 300 employees on 2 sites in the Midlands in England and a headquarters in London. They got involved with lean. Bear in mind, they're not a manufacturing organisation, it's a service organisation. They got involved with lean because their operations director came across an article on lean and started asking questions, engaged a lean consultant, a one-person, not one of the big consultancy firms, a specialist consultant, and they got going in doing a few initial improvement activities, and these demonstrated success. So they started with something called 5S that some of you may have come across, and 5S isn't actually a lean technique. It's something that you might do, but you could do it in all kinds of environments. You can do it in your home, you can do it in your if you've got a garage or a workroom, you do it in there. You can do it with your email inbox. It gets rid of clutter. It creates a more orderly, stable environment in which you can then introduce change. Just in time, for example, cannot work in an environment that's cluttered. You need to have a stable and organized workplace for this to take place. And 5S is a low-cost, inclusive way of getting people thinking about that. So they set up a new office layout that was more aligned to the customer needs, brought multifunctional people together to deliver whole processes rather than passing things from pillar to post. They used visual management. They, for example, put whiteboards on the walls in each office with steel backings, and they went out and bought some round fridge magnets, painted them red on one side and green on the other, and then used these as signals, andon signals is the Japanese word for it, to illustrate when things were fine, green, or if something went adverse, they turned them over and they showed red. An example here being the delivery of mail, which they have a service contract with the Royal Mail in the UK for this to be delivered, I can't remember exactly when, but let's say 9 o'clock in the morning. And if Royal Mail delivered before 9 o'clock in the morning, no one did anything, the whiteboard showed green. But if the delivery of mail was late, the token, the fridge magnet, would be turned over to show red. And because this was a large whiteboard clearly visible to everyone in the room, immediately people would know that there was a problem with the mail. And if your role was one that required mail handling, you knew there was a potential problem and you might be able to do something or offer support to overcome that. It means that management intervention is by exception. If the board is green, there's no need for the management to do anything. The process just runs. And one can argue that, well, if you've got a reliable process and it's always green, you no longer need the manager because the process is self-sustaining, it delivers its function, and can't do any better. What it also means is they gradually devolved responsibility for change down from the higher levels of management to the lower level work teams. Now, after more success, they created a lean support team, just 2 people, and they acted like a local consultant, but only to facilitate. They never told people what to do or how to do it unless they saw that the work teams were stuck. So this is the idea of coaching. Jose Mourinho doesn't get on the football pitch, does he? He stands at the sides. This is the Chelsea, this is Tottenham, I think now, manager, and shouts instructions. Okay, Jurgen Klopp likewise. This is coaching. It's giving advice, giving direction. Now, one of the things that the ops director did every day when he was in the office, about 3 or 4 days a week, was something called a Gemba walk. This is leadership by direct engagement. You might think, well, how does an executive, an operations director of a large firm like this, justify spending an hour a day just wandering around? Well, he could. It was extremely worthwhile. By making his presence visible, not only could people see that he was showing interest in what they were doing, he could see through the visual management where there were problems and then could go and act in a coaching role as a mentor role to some of the senior managers or the area managers and ask them, what the problems were, what their solutions were. And if a manager is able to say, this is my problem, but I've got an idea about how I'm going to solve it, then at that point, the senior manager can walk away. Yes, they'll check later on to say, did you do this? And if they did, they'll start thinking, well, this is a manager who knows what they're doing, can diagnose problems, come up with solutions and deliver them on time. And if not, well, you end up being that same junior manager for the rest of your career. So Lean became an approach that was accepted as how this organization did things. After 3 years, Lean had become fully integrated across all their business functions, and they were applying strategic Lean tools like something called the policy deployment matrix. Gemba walks continued. They were not seen as a threat, which they sometimes are. Sometimes when people in offices and the shop floor see the senior managers walking around, they think, oh, crikey, what's going on here? Why are they looking at me? Is my job under threat? Are they going to close the organization down? What have I done wrong? But in this case, it's not. They just saw this director walking around. He increasingly knew people by name. He would stop, ask how things are going. And as I said before, challenge the junior management to come up with better ideas to get their workers involved. So Lean became embedded. The firm was nominated for a national award. But more importantly than that, the business grew without costs spiraling. In fact, often within Lean operations, the costs that you save through eliminating waste provide the money to allow you to actually grow and change. You don't have to go outside. You essentially reuse the money you've already got in the business. So I'd like to thank you all for listening. I hope there have been some points that you found interesting. I hope that it makes you question the true role of management, or rather what you might do that is more valuable than simply being a manager. And I'll take questions as we drop back into Zoom.
Thank you, Dr. Neil Davies. That's a really engaging sessions, and I really like the example that you shared at the end. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take about a couple of questions, and right after that, Dr. Neil Davies will go through the University of Warwick program, master programs, and after that, we will take all the questions that you may have. So if you have any other question, regarding to the masterclass, please go to the right hand side of your browser. There's a Ask Your Questions Here session. So just type your question over there and we will address that. So I have one question coming in saying that how could Lean concept be utilized to help improve inventory management, for example, in a supermarket?
Okay, well, some people would say supermarkets already are quite lean. So in fact, Lean theory borrows some techniques from supermarkets. I didn't include it in my talk, but one of the mechanisms within Lean is called the supermarket, which is the idea that you don't hold any inventory. In fact, if you go into a supermarket, certainly in the UK, I think some people think that there is a warehouse at the back of the supermarket, but there isn't. All that there is at the back of the supermarket is a loading dock where when lorries come in, they're unloaded and empty cages get put back on the lorry. The shelves are in fact the stocking points. So Lean uses this idea itself. So there's clearly a link between the sort of the retail supermarket trade. It uses the techniques of Heijunka, leveled production. What supermarkets are seeking to do is to have a prediction of the rate of demand and then ship product so that it just in time refills the shelves before they run out. So Lean is already, I would argue, fundamentally employed within supermarket environments. The real challenge, I guess, is more to do with, do you want to get the people in your supermarket involved in coming up with improvements to how the supermarket operates? The people on the shop floor stacking shelves, do they actually have better ideas about how to do that? I don't know if that answers your question, but I think in the case of supermarkets, they are already quite lean.
Okay, is there any other questions coming in? Just feel free to type that out and we will address that later. Okay, I have one more question before we go into the program briefing. So George asked, how do you practice lean in environment where demand is not consistent and lulls and spikes are different at different times?
Okay, good question. And the answer is with difficulty. So classic lean techniques are designed to operate where you have reasonably stable demand, repetitive demand. You know, Toyota, the car industry, the numbers of cars produced per day is pretty much the same. The colors might change a bit. There's a bit of variation in the models that are made or the sizes of engines, but broadly it's fairly stable because you're dealing with large numbers. So what I would say is that what you might find is that you can't easily apply lean, perhaps to the product demand, because that's varying, as you say. But what you'll find is that there are probably some back office operations where you can apply lean. I'll give you an example. So a local hospital that we did some work with on lean in the Birmingham area, they actually had their own little lean academy, a team of 3 people, in fact. They operated over about 3 secondary trust hospitals, so large hospitals. And what they found was that nurse recruitment, I don't know about in Singapore, but in the UK, there's a big turnover of nurses. Yeah, they have career breaks to have families. Young nurses go off to around the world to practice nursing in Australia and New Zealand and then come back later. So there's a constant turnover of nurses. And the classic model for recruiting nurses was it was done at a department level. And at the department level, ophthalmology, trauma centres, the numbers of nurses being recruited on a monthly basis was very variable. Some months you might need 2 replacement nurses, other months none. So that's the kind of problem, George, that you're describing. But what they did was they said, well, actually, the process of nurse recruitment is pretty standard, whether they are trauma nurses, theatre nurses, for example, or whether they are medical nurses or midwife nurses. So they created a specialist team in their human resources department. All of the departments passed their requirements onto this process. And what you then got was a relatively stable demand. Every month, they could place advertising in the nursing journal of a certain size. They didn't have to keep renegotiating because the law of numbers meant that taking the whole hospital or 3 hospitals together meant that every month they might have 20 nurse recruitment positions to fill. And that allowed them to then have a more stable, repetitive process. So, George, the answer there is maybe not in your primary customer focus, but maybe in the supporting processes.
Right. Okay, we'll just take one last question before we move on. So in the lean production, since the company produces all products according to the actual orders, there is no spare finished products to meet unexpected orders. Are there any ways to solve this?
Yes, it's not true to say that lean only produces directly to customer orders. In fact, many firms, including Toyota, have a small finished parts stock. And it's a common strategy, particularly for firms that are starting to do lean, to not try and get to the point where they only make exactly what the customer wants. Because if you do have variability, you just can't do it. So the goal is perfection, which is minimal, eliminate inventory where you can. But that's a long-term goal, and it might take you years, decades, centuries, or millennia to get there. Toyota aren't there yet. Okay, so in certain circumstances, it's quite appropriate to actually have a small amount of finished goods stock to act as a balancing inventory. And this is where Heijunka comes in that I mentioned. So you aim to have in your production processes a steady flow, and then this little buffer stock at the end gives you the opportunity to slightly increase the daily delivery when there's a high demand by absorbing, taking out some material from that warehouse. And then in other days when the demand is lower, you rebuild that small buffer inventory. So the manufacturing processes are very stable, high quality, low cost, and you just suffer a little bit of inventory cost to give you that customer response.
All right, so in the benefit of time, we'll just take the next 10 minutes to quickly go through the Warwick programs. And for the remaining questions, we will just address that right after the program briefing. So shall we flash the slides, Dr. Davis?
Yeah. Okay.
So in any case, along the way, if you have any other question, just take it, type it down in the Ask Your Questions Here session, and then we will just address all of them one by one later on. And I do see some very interesting questions coming in regarding the Lean models. So we will discuss on that later on. Yep, I can see your slides.
Yeah, sorry, something slipped across.
Yep.
Let me just get my mouse back.
Yeah, that's the issue with the double screen, right?
Yeah. Okay, that's better, I hope.
Yep, looks great.
Okay, oh, sorry. Let me grab that back. Okay, so just organizing my windows. Right, I think I'm ready. Okay, so WMG has been working with Sim Global Education for many years now. We offer a number of MSc and PGA programs, from engineering business management through to cybersecurity and management. Your program of study will be supported by a number of organizations depending on the course. So engineering business management and supply chain and logistics management is supported by WMG, University of Warwick, for the tuition essentially, and Sim Global Education for the academic support and control. And for these courses, A-Star SimTech provide guidance and support for the dissertation. For cybersecurity management and program and project management degrees, then it's just WMG and Sim Global Education supporting as before. So why WMG? Well, we've got a leading international reputation gathered over 40 years of working with many leading international organizations to deliver both research and education. We're part of Warwick University, which has got various plaudits. Specifically for WMG, being English, I particularly like the fact that the French government liked it. That's always nice for an Englishman to see the French liking us. The university as a whole, it's up in the top 100 of world university rankings. Warwick is in the top 10 and has been for the last, I can't remember how many years, of universities in the UK. And it's a very international university. So our tutors are very familiar with teaching people from all over the world. One of the mantras that we have within WMG is excellence with relevance. So most of the teachers have industrial or commercial experience. Myself, I worked for 8 years before I joined WMG. So this gives us a backup of knowledge and an ability to interpret theory in a realistic way. So we're always backing up what we deliver with examples and anecdotes. And I think many of the students, both full-time and part-time, like the anecdotes. And particularly if you've got some experience, I think you'll find most tutors like to have an environment in which people in the audience, if they've got a view on something, can contribute. And we can be challenged. It's all about challenge, isn't it? So actually WMG education started with part-time industry-focused courses. But it's not surprising that our graduates have been successful in many fields around the world. The full-time courses started in the 1990s, and many of the graduates from these courses are now in leading firms internationally or running family businesses. Now, the full-time student study lasts for 12 months and comprises 9 one-week modules and a dissertation project. The modules are assessed by coursework. There are no exams. The part-time study lasts for 2 years, generally with larger gaps between the modules to suit the needs of your working life. The dissertation project, but also post-module work as well, should be focused on work-related problems. And this is a benefit for the employer as well as for the student. So the full-time program has intakes in April and October, depending on the course. You can join the part-time program at any one of 6 intakes spread throughout the year. The modules, as I've said, are delivered in 1-week intensive blocks, and they are intensive. So for both full-time and part-time courses, you attend 9 times for a whole week. The UK tutor flies out and will deliver most of the learning, and where possible, local practitioners may deliver case studies. Part-time students, I put this in, part-time students are advised to leave their work phones at home, but few do. Really, if you're a part-time student, your employer should be recognising that when you're studying, you are studying and not answering production problems. But I realise that the reality is if you're a line manager and your line has suddenly stopped, you will get the telephone call. So perhaps the most stimulating but most challenging activity is the dissertation project. It's something that you can really get your teeth into. And unless you go on to study for a PhD, it's probably the longest document you will ever write in your life. It should not be longer than 20,000 words, and ideally shorter. And I say that because I'm a marker. And the shorter the work, albeit being good, the more I like it. So what teaching style? WMG, I don't think we like to think, we're not stuffy. Yeah, we like students to engage and ask questions. We're quite informal, so no sirs or professor this or whatever. It's the English way these days. So use personal names. To my students, I'm Neil. Doesn't mean that we're not polite, but we tend to use our personal names. And I like to think that my relationship with students is more of a peer-to-peer relationship rather than the student-teacher relationship. So we like to get classes working in small teams to do practical work, following on from the theory explanations. We call these syndicate sessions. Usually they're teams of sort of 6 to 8 people, and the class sizes ideally are sort of around 30, and that's our sort of general model for how we do things. We use Moodle as our online learning platform, and we're now getting quite used to fully online delivery where this is required. Obviously, the coronavirus situation has meant that at the moment we're delivering all of our courses in a fully online mode, and we've developed skills, and the university has brought various tools to assist students to work even collaboratively in a completely online environment. Now, hopefully the coronavirus situation will get some kind of solution in the not too distant future, and we can go back to more face-to-face teaching because it's the most enjoyable way of doing things. So there's a different working pattern for the odd and even months. So for example, a course that's running today, this week, will be Saturday to Saturday with Wednesday off because September is month 9, so it's an odd month. So the odd months are typically for the part-time mode because, as you'll see from this schedule here, what we have is Saturday and Sunday 9 till 6 teaching, and then Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday it's evening teaching. And I will acknowledge the fact that by 10 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, or even worse on a Friday evening, some of the part-time students are finding it difficult to stay awake. Now, hopefully the tutors can motivate people to get them awake and keep them awake up until that point. But don't think you can relax on a Saturday morning and catch back on sleep because you're back in at 9 o'clock. Now, for the full-time mode, it's a more classic Monday to Friday, but it's 9 till 6 every day. So it's a lot of work. It's like a full-time job. I have to be honest here and say I prefer the odd month classes because I get time to travel around Singapore, which I don't get if I'm doing a full, an even month course. Well, that's me. So overall, the tuition fees are made up from module fees and a fee for the dissertation. And the postgraduate award fees are lower because there are only 3 modules and no dissertation. It is a lot of money. I mean, I look at these figures and I blink and think, wow. So, you know, you've got to really want to do it if you're going to succeed and make good use of that money. And make your sponsors, if you have sponsors, happy that they supported you. So part-time students are often sponsored by their employers or at least given time off. And they will gain significant benefits in terms of professional development, of their future leaders, but also in short-term activities. For example, post-module assignments might be able to solve small problems in the business. And of course, the project, the dissertation project, is over a year's worth of effort, and that can really tackle a substantial piece of work and give you a real sense of achievement at the end, and for your employer, a sense that this has been a worthwhile journey. So, as I said before, we like to think that we combine academic excellence with our industrial experience. Generally, the materials we've developed have been developed alongside industry through our own links with companies in the UK. Wherever we can, we feed through the results of industrial research into our teaching, so you get the latest thinking. Delivery is also by practitioners. I mean, I don't consider myself an academic. I consider myself an engineer. And we've got global experience, not only in the teaching, but in our research as well, in the companies we deal with. We do like our work and our assignments to be practically oriented. In the UK nowadays, this is called authentic assignments. So we like to produce authentic assignments that are rooted in real problems. So a week is not a free, the MSc is not a free ride. These week-long modules are intensive. The post-module assignments should take you between 40 and 60 hours to complete. This is because formally a module is 10 CATs. So CAT is an internal UK measure of credit and is equivalent to 10 hours of learning effort. So a module is 100 hours. So if you've got 40 hours in class, then there should be 60 hours spent preparing, researching, and producing the assignment. The dissertation is 90 CATs, it's half of the degree. That's 900 hours of effort. So to help you understand the effort involved here, this is equivalent to 22 weeks of working at 40 hours a week. Okay, that's a lot, but remember, you're doing something pretty significant here, and it should be rewarding. It might not feel like that at the time, but at the end it does. So for the postgraduate award, then, as I said before, it's 3 modules and no dissertation project. Okay, as before, the modules are still 10 CAT modules, so you're assessed in the same way on the same materials. Okay, it's just you don't do quite so much. And what it's all leading up to is marvelously this thing. Impressive, isn't it? I have to say, when I got my PhD from Warwick, and when I saw my certificate, which didn't look much different to this, I thought, really, is that it? But seriously, what you get is a life experience and something that will hopefully get you thinking more deeply and more effectively about the problems you'll face in your life going forwards. And that's really the point, isn't it? It's not really just about the piece of paperwork, at least I hope it's not. So entry requirements, I'm going to go through these relatively quickly because there's a lot of detail here, but broadly speaking, we're talking about a second-class honours degree at bachelor's level, or based on your merits. And I would recommend, although perhaps this is something we can discuss afterwards, discussing that with the SIM admissions advisors. So that's a slide for the engineering, business management, supply chain and logistics management, and program and project management. So that leaves one, which is the cybersecurity and management program, which is slightly different. So it accepts, ideally we want people who've got upper two ones and firsts. That's our ideal student. That's what we'd like. Okay, but on the cybersecurity stream, they'll accept third-class honours with additional relevant post-qualification experience, and even mature candidates, as long as they've got SIM or a local polytechnic's advanced diploma and 8 years relevant work experience in entry into the program. Again, on the full-times program, it's a more classic sort of standard second-class bachelor's degree approach. So you'll be taught in English and assessed in English. Now, management concepts particularly can be complex to follow, and higher levels of English proficiency can help. So although our requirement for international applicants is IELTS 6.5 and equivalents in Pearson Test and TEFL, personally, I think you should be aiming for IELTS 7, if you can. Don't set yourself the target of 6.5 and get 6.5. Set yourself the target of 7 and try and get 7. And if you don't, you'll get 6.5 and you'll be fine. The more proficient your English, the easier your studies will be. So merit, if you're interested, is between 60 and 70%. Distinction is 70% and above, and the pass is at 50%. So all modules and the dissertation have to be passed at 50% in order for you to pass the MSc. Now there's a final few slides here, which I'm not going to dwell on too much because, well, I really don't know who these people were. But you can read these as well as I can. Just an idea about some of the roles that people have taken. And of course, the international experience. Some testimonials. Obviously, we've got some happy punters there. We won't talk about the unhappy ones. And I'd just like to highlight the benefit of working in groups with people from a range of cultural and professional backgrounds. It really is useful because in your careers, you're going to end up working with people probably from all over the world or from different backgrounds and from different functions within your organization. And understanding how to communicate and work with those people is a valuable skill to learn. So there's some detailed intake information here. I note that there's a sign down the bottom. It says there's only one intake for MSCM full-time. Sorry, for CSM and PPM full-time, and that's the October intake, which is probably time-worthy. And now I'm going to end the slideshow and hand back to our host.
Thank you, Neil, as you would like us to call you.
Yeah.
As that. Yes, that was really quick and nice. And if you guys have any questions regarding the program, just feel free to ask us the question and we will answer you directly. And at this point of time, I will just bring the questions back to your masterclass because we have a lot of questions coming in. So someone asked, please elaborate on how we can apply Lean concept address the unused talent.
So this is, the first thing here is to change your mindset. If you've got a traditional mindset, and the traditional mindset is essentially the Taylorist view. Workers do, managers manage, and it's the managers and the technical leads' job to tell the workers what to do and how to do it. And there is some truth in that, but it's not the end point. So in a traditional organization, the manager thinks there's not much benefit in talking to their workers and asking them what they think, because the worker is stupid, the worker is lazy, the worker will do anything they can to avoid work, particularly on night shifts, and they can't be trusted. And surprise, surprise, workers think the same about management. They're only here to exploit us, they want to pay us minimum wage, and all these negative historical views. So the first thing is, if you think like that, you've got to change that thinking. It's a mindset. It's about the culture of the organization as well. So if you've got an organization that says, we don't talk to our workers, they just come in and they do the work we tell them to do, then you're not, it's going to be very difficult for you to become world-class lean, because you've only got a small number thinking about the problem. You have the technical leads, the people in the offices, and that's a small number, or should be, okay, because the value is added by the people on the shop floor. And a lean organization says, well, actually, we need to engage the people on the shop floor because they see the processes day in, day out, hour in, hour out. When something goes wrong, the first person to know that something's gone wrong is the shop floor worker. And they've probably seen it going wrong for years because the problem keeps coming back. And they just think, well, unless the boss asks me the question, I'm not going to volunteer an answer. Okay, more for them for not asking me. And the point here is, of course, that increasingly our workers are better educated, literacy levels are pretty high around the world now. You know, we've got graduates now doing work on shop floors, certainly in Europe, in the UK. We've got so many graduates coming out that they're ending up doing jobs that are really beneath them. So it's a question of trust, of belief, of training. It's a progressive approach, and that's really the thing. You've got to change the management's view of what they can get from their workers. And workers have to have the opportunity to try things out. It's no good just saying to the worker, oh yes, we'd like you to make improvements, and then stop. Because the worker's going to say, right, well, what's the target? What's the goal? This is where visual management comes in. What's the goal? What am I trying to achieve? And you say you want me to make improvements, but how do I do that? you need to learn problem solving skills. Maybe you need to do some internal training. Give people some time to learn some basic diagramming skills. For example, to learn value stream mapping, it doesn't take long. It's about recognizing, to get that talent working, it's about letting go, as I said earlier.
Right. Okay. Coming to the next question. Is it possible that lean concepts can be applied in public hospital? Yes,
because they have been widely for many years now. So although I showed you that comment, we're not Toyota, we don't make motor cars, there are a number of good examples around the world for over 20 years. I think one of the main hospitals in Singapore is renowned for its lean processes. There's also Flinders in Australia, Bolton Hospital in the UK. I can't remember if this, I might be quoting the name of a hospital from a TV series, Macy Gray or something like that. It's I think it's in Madison, Wisconsin or somewhere like that. There's one of the US hospitals who's renowned. But I was doing some research work with the business school and the medical school a number of years ago in the UK. And we actually went round to all the hospitals, the primary hospitals in the UK, and we did a survey of their corporate statements. And we found that at the time, over 60% of hospitals in their annual reports were stating that they were doing lean, had adopted lean measures. Now, some of them fell back, and that's a particular problem with the way the National Health Service works in the UK. But yes, it can be done, and there are good examples around the world.
Great. So there's another question saying, have you seen any successful application of lean in view of fourth industrial revolution? Any useful case studies?
No. There you go. That's a nice short answer, isn't it? And why is that? Well, probably because actually Industry 4.0, cyber physical manufacturing, is actually trying to take the more MRP, ERP approach. It's trying to solve the problem with IT. That doesn't mean to say that a company that's following an Industry 4 based approach cannot do lean, but it's not really the focus of research in Industry 4.0. It's not really the focus of the firms that are trying to exploit that technology. So that's why my answer is no. Doesn't mean it's not possible, but Industry 4.0 is still fairly new.
Right. So somebody asked, how does lean theory apply to white collar work?
Well, so for example, I refer you back to my example of the recruitment process for nurses. That's a white collar task. Yeah, it's not really a blue collar task. It's a white collar task. There are a lot of examples of lean in design offices. So design engineers using lean, because if you think of an organization, let's say Rolls-Royce, Aero, then they have thousands of engineers who are involved in processes for designing the components and the sub-assemblies and the assemblies for jet aircraft engines. And in fact, although there's a huge variety of these individual component parts, the process for designing a component is pretty standardized. Okay, you'll be doing basic geometry, there'll be some stress analysis, there will be maybe some aerodynamic analysis, some thermal analysis, there will be various bits of documentation that need to be performed, and these processes are being performed thousands of times a day. So there is a certain amount of literature and work that's been done over the years on lean in the product development process, and that's clearly a white collar task.
Right, okay. I've a couple of more questions. So one of them says, based on your description, lean is a mindset and a management system. In terms of tools, deployment and application, is there a best known order of deployment?
Well, yes, most people follow Womack and Jones's approach, and I use it in my own teaching to structure the materials, which focuses on the tools and focuses on the tools and techniques. It focuses on the process aspect. So in the last part of my presentation, I was talking about people and partners and about the higher levels, the learning organization. Now, what I was doing there was I was following Jeff Leiker's 4P model, which he's taken from his book, The Toyota Way, which has 4 levels: philosophy, process, people and partners, and problem solving. So Warwick and Jones tackle the second step, process, and they have a 5-step model, which are the chapters, the major chapters in their book, Lean Thinking, with the subtitle something like How to Banish Waste and Create Value in Your Organization, something like that. Anyway, the 5 steps are: specify value, which is understand what your customer truly values; identify the value stream, which is what we use value stream mapping for. So how do you currently do it? Try and get these in the right hand. It's like doing an exam now. I've got to remember off the top of my head. So step 3 is make the value flow. Step 4 is pull to customer demand. And step 5 is strive for perfection, which is why it's a journey that never ends, because you never reach perfection. You know that when you reach perfection, you become like Buddha. You disappear in a puff of enlightenment. No one's got there yet, at least not in manufacturing or business. Okay, no one's perfect, not even Toyota. So there are procedures, and Warwick and Jones, in fact, Rother and Shook produced a workbook that most firms use to do lean transformations in business. It's called Learning to See, available at your nearest Amazon dealer. All these materials are on Amazon. Don't go out and buy Learning to See, get your company to buy it. It's expensive, but it's a workbook that takes you through the process. So yes, there are.